I'm DJ Ranma S from Anime Jam Session. We're at MangaNEXT, Day 2, Saturday, and we're here interviewing who I consider one of the greatest American manga artists, also considered the godfather of American manga artists. His name is Ben Dunn. Ben, it's a pleasure, sir.
Nice to meet you.
Right back at you. Ben Dunn has created what was called Ninja High School, one of the longest running comic books that I've collected. From that, we've had several series such as Warrior Aureola, Magic Priest, Ninja High School V2, Quagmire USA, and a few others.
Yeah.
So tell me, Ben, how did you come up with the idea of Ninja High School?
Well, I had come back from a visit in Taiwan in 1976, and I brought back a whole bunch of manga.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I didn't realize it at the time, but Taiwan had no real manga industry, and then I discovered that all the comics I brought back were Japanese bootlegs. So, but I fell in love with the art in those books because I grew up with American comics, and traditionally they were thin, full color,
right.
Normal comic style, and these were thick, small paperback, black and white comics, which I was not used to. And my relatives explained to me they were called manga. I said, "Whoa, I gotta get more of this manga," So I bought as much as I could and brought them to the States. Then of course I graduated from high school and I went to college. And then when I went to college, I decided that I had enough of school. So I left after 3 years of college. I left to decide to start Anarchic Press. And our first book was called MangaZine, and at the time we came out with that, nobody knew what that meant. They just thought it was just a play on words. Of course, the people who were familiar with manga knew what it meant, but it was hard to explain what the title meant. But anyway, Anarchic Press. Oh, hello. Anarchic Press was interested in starting a new regular series, or at least a mini-series, because all we had at the time was MangaZine. And we wanted a stable, ongoing series, or at least a mini-series. So at the time I was a big fan of Project Echo at Urusei Yatsura. And there were some American-grown manga out there that was coming out. Very few, but they were out there, like Ryan 2090, and a few others. I can't remember off the top of my head. So I decided, well, they're all doing sort of like superhero type manga, and I decided to go for the teen, comedy type manga, because that's something I personally, like. So I created Ninja High School, and as a 3-issue miniseries, because it was never intended to go beyond 3 originally. And but it turned out to be such a big hit with readers that we decided to extend it beyond the 3 issues, and that's how it came to be.
Wow, that's pretty interesting, and as I've said to you before, I've read the series and I followed along as the best as I possibly could. So one of my questions, let me jump ahead, but
sure. Explain
what was V2 all about?
Well, we had just come out of the big Image, superhero crash, and we needed something, and also that was also the time when the Bad Girl phase also crashed, so the comic industry was not in good shape, and a lot of publishers were going out of business, and we were fearful that we would also, could not sustain itself. So we decided, also that was at the time where Ninja High School was still being drawn by Katie Bear and Robert Beavine. So I didn't want to interrupt their contract. I could have just stepped in and said, I'm going to take over the book, and just fired both of them. But I felt that was be unfair to both creators, who worked so hard on the book and wanted to continue to the end of their contract. So I let them honor their contract, but in the meantime I wanted to do a Ninja High School book.
Okay.
So that I could sort of reestablish the brand. And so I created V2 as a way to introduce a new cast while keeping the old classic version going. And then I would go ahead and incorporate that into the regular series once their contract ended.
Okay. Because as I was reading it, and I see in the issue that the both storylines were merging, and I was like, this can't be happening. I like Ricky. He's a cool character, but I'm just part of old school of Jeremy, Azrael, Ichiku. You know, those are my trio I follow from through and through.
Well, I always said from the very beginning that I wasn't going to. I was going to change the cast as time went on.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't going to keep them eternally in the 80s,
Right.
so to speak, or at least just update them, to modern sensibilities. I felt for the comic to grow, the characters had to grow,
Right.
And my sensibilities also changed, and I wanted the characters to move on, and to find new things to do. And I tell you, I have a very short attention span, and when I grow ready to start a new cast, I just decide, hey, it's time for a change, and then, but I don't ignore the old cast. The old cast still has a role to play, and that's one of the things I like is that I've built, people have built up continuity in Ninja High School. Now it has a real history and a real past, and it's got characters that we can draw on and pick and choose and reestablish, or they get married and they have kids of their own. And they grow up to take over, the mantle. Quagmire will always be there, but the cast comes and goes, because I feel that, because when I started Ninja High School, Ronald Reagan was president, there was no internet, or there was very little internet. The Macintosh was just introduced, the very first one, and Photoshop 1.0 wasn't even out yet. So you can see how I would want to change the characters to reflect, how things have grown, how society has changed, how technology has changed.
Now, as you see, a lot of comic book companies are doing reboots of their titles and series. Given how things have changed since you first started Ninja High School, would you ever consider doing a reboot of the series?
I had considered it, but after reflection, I decided that it wasn't a good idea to reboot it. I figured if I really wanted to reboot it, I'd just change the cast, which I've done in the past. And that's more or less my way of, quote-unquote, rebooting the character without having to just chuck, all 25 years of history out the window and say, oh, this is the new cast, this is the new version, the hell with everything else.
Right.
I felt that was a disservice to the readers who stayed loyal to the book for all these years.
Okay. Now, one thing I liked in the series was the combat cheerleaders. That's something that's quite different. So, how did you come up with that concept?
Well, I don't know where I came up with that concept, to be honest. I think what it was is that I thought it was just something different. It was. I thought that I had introduced Hitomi and his girl commandos, and I sort of like that was sort of a springboard to do that, sort of like a stateside version of that.
Oh, okay.
And I also felt like cheerleaders are always portrayed as cheerleaders, kind of bubble-headed, goofy type of characters. Not to stereotype any of them, but I felt that what if Quagmire had a terrible football team, but had a fantastic cheerleading squad. It was also into full combat cheerleading. I just thought that was something kind of unusual that fit within the confines of Quagmire, because to me, Quagmire was like a way for me to just introduce whatever wild concept I could come up with.
It's interesting that you mentioned Quagmire, because for a while, during the run of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, there was a 2-part miniseries where they had the assistance of a character named Quagmire. And a lot of people at the time that I was talking that were fans of the series, they kept saying that Saban was, knocking at AP, like throwing an homage to it.
I have no idea. I mean, that would be flattering if that were true, but I can't confirm or deny whether
Okay.
that was. I know they didn't come to us to ask, for anything, and I'm not sure, but I know that we had introduced Zetraman,
Yes.
way before Power Rangers had come out, to sort of promote the idea of a Sentai superhero, shtick. And when morphed from Power Rangers, I thought that was great. That's a great idea. I'm surprised it took this long for them to do it, because I've always been a big fan of the Sentai shows, and I'm sure there was a big cult following for them until the Power Rangers had come out. But if that's true, then that's great. Then I feel like maybe somewhere someone's doing a nudge nudge wink wink type thing.
Yeah, because it took me about a couple of years ago to figure out Zetraman homage to it, because there's a series at Gokaiger where they're going through all of the prior 34 Super Sentai teams, and going through them, I noticed one of them, and I think it's Sun Vulcans.
Sun Vulcan,
Yes.
yes. That was the show that I saw when I was in Taiwan. They happened to be running that show there, and I had never seen it, of course. So when I, as a kid, 12, 13 years old, when you see a Sentai show for the first time, it's like, holy, what is this? And it's like the wild. There's nothing like that on America, because at the time in the 70s, they were downplaying violence on Saturday morning cartoons
Right.
and stuff. So, but here there are these guys who are like blowing people up and doing all this martial arts stuff. You could never get away with that, in stateside until after new regulation of the or not new, but when they laxed the rules for cartoons. But I love Sun Vulcan. It was a great show. It was funny. I didn't understand what they were saying, but the story was so simple. You didn't need to understand what they were saying. It was just great. So I transplanted those into Ninja. In fact, Ninja High School, all it really is just all my loves of different various. I love pop culture stuff. And it just an excuse for me to just implant them into a comic book format. I just do my little quirky take on it.
Yeah, and I have to agree with you about that, about the whole Sentai effect. Because when Power Rangers first came on TV, I went nuts on it. I was like, I've never seen anything like this before. And then years later, online, seeing it, there are people putting out the Japanese episodes. I started following. I'm like, this is just one of the best things I've ever seen. And it's like lately at conventions, more people are doing Sentai cosplays, Kamen Rider cosplays, which reminds me, if I remember correctly, Ramen Rider.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's another my little thing on Kamen Rider, is because that was another show that I quickly fell in, that I really liked a lot. And I just thought, oh, well, why not? If I've done all this other stuff, might as well see where it takes me, So I thought that changing it to Ramen Rider sort of fit with the character who, eventually...
Sammy, yes.
I also thought that Kamen and Ramen, there was only one letter difference.
Exactly.
And I couldn't think of anything else, so I said, well, what the hell, Ramen Rider.
Definitely. Now, I noticed for a while, when you came back to do the series, and I think it was around episode 50, you had some guest artists come in as well.
Yeah, I took over the book at 75, and then I went to 124, and then Katie Bear and Robert took over from 125 to about 130, 33. And what they did was their contract was for I guess 26 issues or so, and then I took over with 134, which introduces the new cast into the thing, and that's when I originally had a writer do it, but he didn't quite understand the direction I wanted to go in Ninja High School. I was being a little too over the top, Ninja High School. But we didn't see eye to eye on the direction.
Right. Okay.
So I let him do his contract out, and then I hired Robert to retake over the series, with me collaborating.
Okay.
And that's where we ended up with the Sadoshi version. of Ninja High School, and that ran until the end of until 175.
Okay. I haven't been following it lately, but I'm assuming that the book is still going pretty much.
No,
No?
we had to put the book on hiatus
Okay.
because after 175, because that was when Diamond changed its ordering policy,
Oh, okay.
and the book wasn't selling enough to meet the threshold
Oh, I see.
for sales. So it was either try to bump the sales up or raise the price to the point where we could do it, and I just felt like raising the price would just be too much, and I wanted to take a little break anyway from the book so I could sit back and reflect on the series and try some other projects. And then once I figured I had a really good storyline in my head that I could reintroduce a new cast, then I would go ahead and revive the series.
All right. Okay. Now I do know there's been little side projects within Ninja High School, such as the yearbook, the Girls of, and Perfect Memories.
Yes, those are just those were born out of all the fan art I was getting at the time, and people were sending me these fan stories, and I thought, this is a great resource. We should take advantage of it, and give people an opportunity to do stories based on characters that they like, and give them an opportunity to get published. And so the yearbook came out of that, opportunity for people to try their hand at writing and publishing their own story without committing to a full-fledged story, and or doing an anthology where you have a bunch of unknown stories. But this way, these guys were an established brand at the time, and it gave them an opportunity to try their hand at writing and drawing and getting published, and getting paid for it too. So, and a lot of people came out of that. Robert De Jesus was one of them. Fred Perry was another. They all got their start in the yearbooks.
I remember I have met them, and when I met Fred Perry at Amazement one year, I showed up with a stack of the Combat Cheerleader storyline he did, and Azure versus Cheetah books.
Yeah.
I think he just had this look of, where did you find these? And I was like, this is from my personal collection.
Well, that's how he got his start, and I love to give people their break, because that's one of the things that I've always felt committed to, was to give people opportunity to get published, because I felt that at the time, this was before the web comics and internet.
Right.
That was the only way to get known, and it was to get published, other than self-publishing yourself. And that was tricky because Diamond was pretty much the only game in town, and they didn't take your book, and you were out of luck. But now with the internet, anybody can do anything now. They can just go to one of the websites that do comics, or just do their own web page, and they can bang, their comic is right there for thousands and millions of people to see. So that's an amazing thing, I think.
With the popularity of as web comics, have you thought of bringing NHS back as a web comic format and do anthologies throughout the year?
I had considered it. I'll be honest with you, I am not very tech savvy. I have no idea how to run a web page or do a web page or anything. Everything I've done through a second party, because it's I just insert, click, and that's it.
Right.
I can go about as far, but I should learn to do it, because I think that's important, for everyone to be able to do it. And or maybe I'll just wait for my kids to grow up and let them do it. But yeah, I had considered it, but right now I'm not sure how to actually monetize it so that it is worth me putting out material. I've heard a lot of people, different business models. Some people say I should do this, some people say I should do that. And I tell you, I'm a very bad businessman when it comes to trying to maximize my return. I usually let other people handle that, and trust that they know what they're doing. But all I really want to concentrate on is just doing comics and just And maybe someday I might do Ninja High School on the web, but it's not the same as actually doing a book,
Right.
with numbering. But gotta face the new reality that comics may be on the way out, or at least paper comics. So we'll have to change our business model so that we can, slowly evolve into whatever it's going to evolve into.
Interesting. Throughout the years you worked on Ninja High School, is there a particular storyline that possibly is like one of your favorites, something that you just really love to work on?
Oh, well, I really like the giant monster storyline.
That was good.
I really enjoyed doing that. Let's see, I did like V2. I thought V2 was really fun to do as well. And I would like to do more with Ricky, but now he's sort of out of the picture now. I'm going to create some new characters, new cast. But yeah, those two are my favorite. I liked all the Ninja High School stuff I've written and drawn personally, because I just have an affection toward all of it, and even the stuff that other people have written. I know that some people have come to me and say, "Oh, well, this is not Ninja High School." I said, "Well, it's continuity now. I mean, how many people like the Spider-Man clone thing? But
Right.
it's hard to."
Mm-hmm.
It's part of the continuity now. You see, that's the thing. You might just accept it for what it is and just move on.
Definitely. One thing is, I always thought that Ricky would end up with Itchy, because since his mom's a retired ninja, I figured, it would go that way.
Oh, you mean Jeremy?
Yeah.
Yeah, everyone sort of thought that, but I thought that I would just do something really different, and I didn't really know who he would end up with, to be honest. But as I was writing the story and things were moving along, it just felt like a natural fit, to have Jeremy and Azrael. And plus, it gave me the excuse to do some outer space stuff, and things like that, and really take the series, into directions that would belie the title, Ninja High School. And I think the way things worked out, to me that's sort of like life in general. You just don't know how it's going to end up, And some people think that this is how it's going to end up, and then somehow something happens and it changes the whole dynamic.
Plus, since Jeremy did end with Azrael, it made Lindo happy, because he had wanted Itchy for the longest time. So
yeah. That's true, and he ended up with her, and that's she seems to be quite content, being behind the scenes and all that kind of stuff. And she seems more or less satisfied with her lot in life, and that's really all we can really hope for.
Most definitely. I know we spent the bulk of our time talking about Ninja High School, because it's personally one of my favorite series to date. But you have worked on other titles like Magic Priest, Warrior Nun, Aureola. Can you tell us a little bit more about the other titles you've done?
Well, I did Warrior Nun, Aureola. That was in response to religious characters in comics being portrayed very negatively. And I went, even though I'm not a Catholic, I went to a Catholic school for most of my education. And I felt that somehow that there was a need for a positive religious, character.
Okay.
And of course, a lot of people felt that since I made her really, attractive and gave her a very skimpy outfit, that I was actually doing the opposite. But if they actually read the book, they know that I was trying to portray it in sort of a very positive light. And I also wanted it to be very simple, straightforward, with a good versus evil storyline, nothing, fancy or no proselytizing or anything like that. Like if you don't believe in God, you're going to go to hell. I didn't do any of that stuff.
Right.
It was just a simple good versus evil. And that was it. And it was meant to be, again, a 3-issue series, and doing no more was planned after that. And of course, when the book became a big hit, we, decided to continue, the series. I worked on Marvel Mangaverse for Marvel, and that was at the time when manga was sort of at its height.
Right.
And Marvel wanted to experiment with doing manga. So it was basically good timing. I didn't think actually when I sent my submission, to Joe Quesada, that I would get anywhere. I wouldn't get any response, because to submit something cold to Marvel, more likely you're gonna just not hear anything, But I was really surprised. I got an email from him saying that he wanted to pursue, the idea. So I said, wow. So they planned out what my original plan for Mangaverse was. I was going to do each character in the order, a manga version of each character in the order that they appeared. So the first one would be Fantastic Four, the second one would be whoever was second, the Hulk I think was the second one, and then on and on in order they appeared. But Marvel didn't want to commit to that long series. So they decided, well, we have a skip week, in I think it was March or May or something like that. And so we need they made it a 5th week event. So they decided they were going to just have me do the 2 bookends, and they were going to have other creators create their own, manga versions of their characters. That's how it ended up being. And then when it sold really well, they decided to commit to a full series. Unfortunately, I had no idea. I wasn't ready to commit to a full series, so I had no idea what to do. So I hired a writer, named Kevin Gunstone to write the series, and I think he and I did not see eye to eye on the way the series should have gone, and also Marvel wanted the book in a big hurry. So I had to rush a lot of the stuff. So I couldn't commit the resources and the what I really wanted to do, and so Mangaverse didn't last as long as. Also, I also got feedback from people that it was one of those things where actual people who liked manga didn't care much for it, and then the Marvel people didn't care much for it. So it was more like I was caught between 2 worlds that just didn't see eye to eye. So the Mangaverse was an interesting experiment, and I would love to do more, but I don't think Marvel's ready to go back to that well again.
Yeah, because I did pick up their manga books for Spider-Man, which was really good. Mm-hmm. And when I picked up the X-Men book, I stopped like 3-4 issues. It was pretty much like a manga adaptation of the American cartoon. It was like.
Well, I know they actually did. They hired a manga artist to do the actual X-Men book. Mm-hmm. I think Kia Asiyama or some did the art. And my understanding was there was a huge. There was huge pushback from the readers. They just did not like, manga artwork being introduced in X-Men. So, consequently, I don't think Marvel readers were ready to have their characters mangafied, basically.
Pretty much.
And I think people who read manga could care less about Marvel. So, I mean, it's just one of those things where it was a interesting experiment, but it was a Frankenstein monster that nobody really wanted. So it's Marvel, I guess, will just do what Marvel does, and manga will keep going the way it's going. So
pretty much, yeah. Tell me a little bit about Exo Squad.
Exo Squad was a series I worked with Will Mignot. It was his attempt at anime.
Okay.
And to do a serious storyline that I think goes back to the mid-90s.
Right.
And he felt that America was ready for sort of a massive Gundam type story, that with continuity. And Wilbur was very proud of the series because he and spent a lot of time developing it, making stories. Take it really serious.
Well, I was really floored by it, and truth be told, it is one of the most coveted titles to get on DVD, because when it came out, it was like gone just like that. And me, a bunch of few others, we've been scouring like Amazon, eBay, in hopes that there would be like another re-release of the series.
Well, I have no idea. I'm sure that whoever Universal, I guess, holds the rights to it, I don't know what their decision is to. Maybe they still feel they can make anything off of it. I mean, who knows? But I had worked with them, before on storyboards with Ghostbusters and Kid and Play and New Kids on the Block, those kind of storyboards. So he asked me to help do storyboards on Exo Squad, and I did 2 or 3 episodes, and that was about it. I mean, I could tell that he really, really wanted this to be, almost cinematic and, totally taken seriously. But the problem is that the kids didn't understand it.
Right.
And it played during a time slot that most adults couldn't watch it, or they weren't even aware of it, And unfortunately, I think at the time, anime was still, even though it was growing, it still had not made its impact on the larger society as a whole. And so it was sort of caught, maybe the timing was wrong, If maybe Exo Squad had come out maybe 5 years later, it might have been a huge hit.
I believe it. Outside of working on comics, what kind of fun stuff you like to do?
Oh, I love to watch movies, especially genre movies. I'll watch, I'll watch just about every B movie, that I can, too much to the chagrin of my wife. I mean, I love watching old 50s and 60s science fiction and horror and goofy 70s stuff. And I love a lot of the CGI movies coming out these days. I'll watch any of that stuff because even though they may not be great, I mean, I've noticed a lot of the stuff coming out now though looks very rushed, and unprofessional. But I'll still watch it just to see, how far people are getting with the art form. And I've noticed that I see sort of a return back to the sort of hand-drawn quality of the characters. Some of the stuff that sort of creeps me out are the CGI movies where they make the characters too realistic. And it's like when I watch Polar Express, I said, boy, this movie is really freaking me out, because it's just like these people look too real, and yet I know they're not because it's CGI, and it's like, ugh. But I'll still watch it just to see how far they're going to go, with it. I also like to read, manga that comes out. I have to go by recommendations because, there's so much out there. I can't even begin to sort through all of it.
Right.
And of course, I just like to draw and sketch. And I go to a sketch club where I meet with other artists, and we just hang out and draw and share ideas and share secrets with how we do things, things like that. So that's one of the things. Of course, that's and I like to collect comics. So that's still one of my weaknesses. Collect comics, and I like to also collect vintage toys and things like that. Which is hard because I have 2 kids and they want to play with, Daddy's $500 Lost in Space robot. And says, "Oh no, you can't talk, you can't touch that." And some of the toys these days are just like outrageously expensive. It's amazing. But of course, they want the biggest thing they can get. But those are things that I use to distract myself.
Given like various TV shows that you've watched, movies, is there like a movie or a TV show you would just like to do a comic book out in your own style, pretty much?
What was
I mean, you watch a lot of movies and TVs. If you had an opportunity, which movie or TV show you would like to turn into a comic?
Oh, that's an interesting one. There's a lot of movies that have already been comics. But one that hasn't ever been a comic?
Yeah. Or one that's existing, you would do it but put your own personal spin on it.
Let's see, I don't know. That would be a toughie. I think, yeah, you got me on that one. Because I love so many movies and stuff like that. It would be hard pressed for me to, because if it's a cartoon already, then doing a comic seems kind of redundant. There's a lot of live action stuff that's already been turned into comics, so there would be no reason for me to duplicate that. Gosh, I don't know. For the most part, I like to do things, on my own. I like to make up my own stuff. I mean, I do like working on other people's stuff, but it's not the same because you're beholden to the licenses, and it's hard to just go all out and do your own thing. I guess if I had to choose a movie or TV show that I would love to see as a comic, oh gosh, you got me. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I mean, I love so many things. I would love to see a manga version of, maybe. Well, I think they've already done that. Josie and the Pussycats, I think they did sort of a manga version of that, didn't they?
I have no idea if they did. I may have to go track it down.
Well, I do know that Archie drew, he had Josie and the Pussycats drawn in that particular style. I would love to be able to do, because I love those characters. Scooby-Doo, maybe manga, would be kind of cool.
Oh, I can see that.
Yeah, I could see Scooby-Doo as maybe Harry Potter as a manga. It'd be kind of cool to do that as well.
I've been saying for the longest that would be a pretty good manga series.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that would be kind of cool to do. I mean, if I could have control of anything, that would probably be the one series I would love to get a hold of. That's I mean, there's probably tons of other, and I'll probably walk out of here and say, I should have said things like that, and it'll just become flooding in. Those are just off the top of my head.
It happens, but as we wrap this up, let me ask you, what do you see the future of yourself in Aeronautic Press?
Well, if I can, I will keep drawing, until I can't draw anymore, and I love to draw. I love to give, I love to meet other artists, because one of the greatest pleasures I get is, looking at how other people draw, how they do it, how they do it. So I may, more or less have my own style and, have my own ability to make a living off of it, but I always feel like somehow I can improve my work. And if there's any opportunity for me to look at other artists' work, I always take that opportunity to. And I always like to give people their break too. I don't have as much influence as I used to because I no longer run the company. When I was running the company, I could just say yes, no problem. But now I got to recommend, people and to Aeronautic Press, and then they have to follow up on that recommendation. Because if I meet someone I like, that's really good artist, has a really good storyline, all I can say is just send it in and see where it takes you. My only thing is that I can hope I can just keep drawing until basically I croak.
Do you still prefer drawing the old-fashioned pencil and paper?
Yes,
or
I do.
The tablet and stylus?
I should teach myself to learn to use a tablet. First of all, I just don't feel justified in spending $2,000 for a big glorified drawing thing. But people have told me it greatly increases their efficiency. It makes it really. But I'm an old dog. It's hard for me to learn new tricks. I mean, I will one of these days. I will sit down and probably figure it out. But I like the idea that I have actual artwork that I can keep and store, and hold on to and look at. Because it's not the same when you see it on the computer screen.
Right.
You can't hold on to it. You can't see it. You can't look at it. At a distance and up close. Holding it in your hands. You have to sort of like zoom in, zoom out, look at this. And I don't see the big picture because, first of all, the screen is not big enough, for me to look at the whole thing. And when they come up with an 11 by 17 screen, then maybe I'll buy that. But, because I like to do things in order, because that's just a habit that I've developed over the years. While, people like Fred, who gone all digital. I mean, I don't think he's produced any artwork on paper except for commissions, you know, in like years, you know. So there's no gold digger artwork out there after a certain number, because he's done all his works on in digital format, you know. And but until that time comes, I feel like I just like using pen and paper. It's easy. If my computer crashes, there's no big deal. You know, if I don't have to be reliant on battery power or electricity, you know, I can just sit down and start to draw. You know, that's, I think, the simplest thing you can do.
That works for me.
Yeah.
So, but it's a pleasure.
Pleasure.
I thank you. And as I say, you're like one of the legends in the comic industry. You've done so much, given so much back, and I can see from after what you've done, other artists like the homage to you. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.
No problem. Have a good day.